Hey, Red Clay Rambler fans. I've started working on a new podcast series about the history and impact of the Archie Bray Foundation. If you are a resident artist or have a good story to tell about the foundation, I would love to have your voice be a part of this upcoming series. We've created the Bray Story Line, which was an easy way for you to dial in from your cell phone or any phone and leave us an audio message. You can call the story line at 774-500-BRAY, where you can leave up to a 10-minute message. If you'd prefer to write out your story, you can do that by emailing me at ben@archiebray.org. Thanks in advance, and let's get on with the show. Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 442 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today on the show, I talk with Jackie Head, who is an artist that's based in Indianapolis, Indiana. She creates neo-op art installations that manipulate space with the interplay of color and undulating pattern. She recently finished a large-scale mixed media installation at the Indianapolis airport that was 1,400 feet long, so we're going to talk a lot about that in this interview. We're also going to talk about directing a team to accomplish a complicated install like that, as well as how she develops specific glaze colors for her ceramic tile. If you'd like to see examples of her work, you can go to her website. That's jackiehead.com. Also wanted to mention that I'll have new work available at the Archie Bray's holiday sale, which is going to open today, November the 11th at 5 p.m. Mountain Time online. For more information, you can go to the website. That's archiebray.org. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. Let's talk about your public art installation work, because as I've been kind of following your career, you have gallery show work, and then you have these really large, massive scale public art installations. So can you talk about the one that you put up recently at the Indianapolis airport?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just installed a piece of art that it went on a chain link fence. So it is about 300,000 plastic cups that they manufacture out of Texas. I believe it's Corpus Christi. And they actually make these little plastic cups kind of to fill in the spaces as if people would if they were using solo cups on a homecoming game and they wanted to spell Go Tigers or something. This company started making cups that I think there's like 18 or 22 colors, and they actually link into the fence. So like once they're popped in there, they interconnect so that they're really structurally sound. And so the Indianapolis airport has this huge construction project that they're working on, and they're redoing all of the runways so that they can have heavier planes land, so that they can have larger planes land. So with that, it's a 3 to 5 year long construction project. They had to build a new concrete plant. I think they have like 2,600 jobs that they've created with this project. But the downside of that project is that there was a large concrete plant that you could see as you were entering into the Indianapolis airport. And I think like out of all like mid-sized city airports in America, Indianapolis has been voted number 1 consecutive years. They really want to, they're very into Hoosier hospitality and having this phenomenal experience going into the airport. And so the CEO didn't want this huge concrete batch plant to be the first thing that people see. So they built a fence, and the fence is 2 different sections that total 1,400 feet long, so 14,000 square feet. And once they had the fence, they were like, well, how are we going to cover this so that it hides the concrete or distracts the concrete batch plant? And so they went and partnered with the Arts Council of Indianapolis to create a call for artists. And through their brainstorming, they somehow landed on putting these plastic cups in. And so I applied for the call and was selected, and then kind of moved on through there.
And how tall is that fence?
It is 10 feet tall.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah, and I'm only 5'5". So we could, and I was the tallest person on my team. So we could only reach to about 6.5 feet tall. And then we had to get support to get up to the higher spots.
And how did you, because it's geometric patterning with many different colors, but how did you plot this out as a whole? Like, is this digitally designed? And then, like, how does that work?
Yeah, so that's interesting. And it actually, like, how my work has changed is going into grad school, I was designing all of my artwork on Adobe Illustrator in 2-dimensional patterns. And going into grad school, I started learning Rhino and have now shifted to designing everything 3-dimensionally, and then print out plastic prototypes. And so I was so grateful that I had this foundation in Adobe Illustrator, because that's kind of what I use as my sketchbook, either Rhino or Illustrator. And so I was sent a box of these cups, and they were in all of these wide variety of colors. A lot of the colors I don't use because they're primary colors. And I typically will do like a red, orange, or like a lime green, but I won't use Kelly green and red and yellow. So I was kind of like, what the heck am I going to do with this box? And I was playing around with it, and I got on Adobe Illustrator, and the way that I first started approaching it is I created a grid system in Illustrator, and I started filling in individual colors. And I was kind of thinking of it as like needlework or quilting and patchwork squares. And I was like, okay, like what kind of shapes and repeated patterns can I do? The original way I thought I was going to approach it is creating all of these repeated patterns within square network systems. And it was just interesting how it started, because I thought I was going to create an entire grid system and then fill in each individual color and kind of understand the way that the pattern could develop from there. But what actually had to happen is I just started doing large stripes, because I was like, I have a whole lot of space to fill. I really like rainbows. I've always, like, a lot of my work has rainbows, but they won't be like a direct rainbow stripe. It'll just be more of an array of rainbow colors. And so the first pattern I started doing was just lining up all of the colors in chromatic array, like Roy G. Biv, and started doing these stripes, because I had a square grid, but it was tilted 45 degrees. So it was like a diamond. And I was like, so I have to work within this square grid. A lot of the patterning I had done before had been hexagonal grid work, and I'd done a little bit of square gridding. But once I did these stripes, I just had these huge rainbow stripes. And I was just, knocking my head against the table of like, what did I get myself into? How am I going to fill this space? And once I got the rainbow stripes on there, I started overlapping them within Illustrator. You can do layers and like bringing things forwards and backwards. And so I started pushing with that within this one area, and then things just kind of spiraled in like a really amazing way. And I just was like, okay, we have a long fence. I need to develop a lot of patterns. And so I just kept going from there, and, sketching one pattern or segment. And then I would learn something as I was developing that pattern. And then I would move to the next. I would think of an idea, and then I would start sketching that. And then I would build out what that segment would look like. And I just kept going. And I probably had like 40 or 50 different types of pattern and segments. Like when I say segment, I mean like one structural pattern. And so once I had those, I was like, well, how do I put these together? And so within Illustrator, you can only go like 200 inches wide. So I did 1 inch by 140 inches, and 1 inch equaled 10 feet. And so I'm designing this all on like a very microscopic level in reality for what it is. But everything was fitting within a square or on a 45-degree angle. And then once I had that done, I sent it off to get approved. And then once it was approved, I overlaid a square grid on top of that and lined all of the lines up, and then sat and counted 300,000 squares to figure out the number count that we needed a product, like what kind of product we needed to order. So like we had like 90,000 black cups, but that meant I had to count 90,000 squares. And thankfully I have an assistant who was able to help me with that. And like the assistant is my sister. So she was in Indianapolis and I would email her like sections of the fence and I would be like, please. And so she's like on her iPad counting and I'm like on my laptop counting. It was like a full week of work. It was wild.
Did it mess up your eyes looking at the computer in that way, trying to count all these small increments?
Oh no, well, I don't know how she did it, but like since I had Illustrator, I would color block out segments. So like once I had counted like and it's all math based. A lot of my work is math based. So I would look at a diagonal stripe and it's like 72 squares running one length, but it's 4 wide. So you multiply to get that number. And then I'm like, oh, well, there's like 16 of these red stripes. And then I would mark those off that I had completed them. And I am really good at getting into a state of flow when I'm working on the computer and on the design work. So it would like I would emerge and go outside, and I would think I was counting these at the beginning of May, and then it was funny because it was lining up with like I got the opportunity like a week after. I don't remember when I was notified. It was maybe a couple weeks before my thesis show. And then I had the first Zoom call like a week after my thesis show. I'm still in school. I had to turn in the design by May 1st, but like my thesis show was April 11th. And so I'm like decompressing from a whirlwind of that chaos and then starting on this project. And like, I hadn't even graduated. I was counting these squares and I realized I was like, oh my God, I have a full-time job. And I did like, nobody told me because I'm my own boss. And so I didn't know it. But it's like a wonderful problem to have. But I was like, oh shoot, like I need to, start working 40 hours a week now.
So when you figured out what the actual needs are, like let's say you need, did you say 300,000 cups? Is that what it ended up being in the end?
Well, I think it was like 350 in the end. There were some learning opportunities that occurred around over the course of the project that like the fence was longer than I had anticipated.
But in terms of the math and the financial part of that, you put in the proposal to the Indianapolis Arts Council or whatever that council is with a financial outlay. Like, I need you to pay me this as the artist, but I need you to buy the materials that's this much. So how do you in advance figure that out?
So this was a very interesting project, and each public art project I've taken on it's been at a point where like I'm really comfortable with taking it on with the skill set that I have. So with this project, once they had determined that they wanted to they're called put-in cups, wanted to use this product, they put a call out for artists. And I actually didn't know about it. And somebody at the Arts Council emailed me and they were like, hey, I think you would be a good candidate for this because of the way that you approach your work. And so I was in school. I was like, I'm not thinking about post school right now, but I really appreciate them considering me. And so I'll throw my name in the hat because I want to keep good on my relationship with them. And then was pretty shocked when I got it. But within the scope of the project, they had a design fee that they were paying the artist, and then they had a labor fee, and then they had a product fee. So like they were handling all of, like it ended up being over $100,000 for all of those 3 different areas, but they were managing all of the money. So like when I needed more cups, like I said, the fence ended up being longer than expected. I needed to order more product. I just contacted my person at the airport, my point of contact, and I said, hey, can we have like X, Y, and Z, these number of cups? And so they ordered everything. So I don't know what the original number for product I think was $72,000, but I don't know what the end number ended up being because I wasn't part of that. And I know we went over on the labor budget. And so thankfully within the Indianapolis Airport Authority, they are super supportive of artists and they bring a lot of artwork into the airport and they want to make sure people are paid equitably. And so they were very supportive. Like there was just a full communication throughout the entire time of like, hey, I'm at this point in the labor budget. And so I'm like keeping track of my hours, my assistant's hours. We're at different wages because I'm a manager of the project and they're assisting. And so calculating that, keeping track of it, the original budget, I had $13,000 and I thought that it was going to take $8,000 or $9,000 and then I would just pocket $4,000, but we went way over. And so having open communication to determine like, since my sister was one of my assistants, she was very tied into the project as well. And so she and I, as this was going on, we were like, this is going to go way over the timeline that's expected. And so we thought we were going to be out there in August and September just doing it for free to get the project done. But thankfully, the airport was able to work with us and gave us more leeway on that.
As you describe this, it's a lot like building a house or something like that. Like you're the intellectual part of keeping track of the inventory, keeping track of the labor is like you're a construction foreman.
Yeah.
Now that you've done, and I know you've done other public projects, nothing this big though. Now that you've done something this big, did this satisfy something in you? Like, okay, that's enough. I'm going to go back to making art installations in a gallery.
Well, I think that's like kind of how my work has always gone, and I'm really lucky. So I think of my studio practice, I have like 4 facets within it. And ideally, I would spend 25% on each one. So, like, one is public art, one's private commissions. So, like, more like site specific for people's homes. One is corporate commissions. So, the larger scale works that are about like 20 feet wide. So, if I'm going into a lobby space or a hotel, and then my fine art research. And it's interesting trying to figure out how to satisfy all those areas. Some of them need to happen because I need to make money. Some of them happen because I'm really interested in doing it. And I think, like, as you said, I don't know if we were recording, but like I used to make pots. And so when I was in my studio in Florida, I would make pots and then I would make wall work and I would go back and forth. And so this is similar where like I've done public art. I don't feel a strong need to apply to anything right now that is public art. I am just so grateful to be back in my studio right now and having my hands in clay. But I'm sure like in a couple of months, I'll be like, that sounds really fun. It just like goes in waves, and it's really nice to have the flexibility of like focusing on one thing and another. And so right now in my studio practice, I have 4 corporate commissions that I'm working on. And, it's wonderful, but it is also like, because of doing the public art and doing the corporate commissions, I haven't done anything for myself in the studio since I graduated from school, and I stopped making around April 1st. And so I'm really eager to get back to that area of my work. And so I'm kind of like, all of these commissions will end around December 31st, and then I'll have 2 months to just really focus on my own research. And so it's really cyclical. And that's a lot of what I'm learning with the work that I do is cyclical. Like a couple weeks ago, I was working 25 or 30 hours a week. And I'm like, this seems weird. Like, this is too relaxing. And like, now it's picked up. And so now I'm working like 50 hours a week. I just, as things are ramping up towards December 31st, it's just going to keep kicking up.
When you think about the ceramic work that you do, the tiles themselves, you're creating the shape, and then you're also creating the color. But then with this big public mural, like the object was already the object. And as you mentioned, the color were the colors. You mentioned that you don't use really bright green and really bright red, but you did in this project because you had to. So as you walked along that fence, when the whole thing is done, were you like, this is good art? Like, can you judge it as an art piece?
Yes, I think I will. Everybody else judges it as an art piece. And I'm pretty self-critical of myself. And so like with most projects, I kind of need 6 months time to step away from something to come back and look at it with a fresh set of eyes. Like the project itself took so much longer than we had anticipated. The original goal was 30 days to complete it. I thought it would take 6 to 8 weeks, but it ended up taking 4 months just with certain delays and whatnot. So towards the end of it, I was very, very drained. It was extremely physically taxing, and I wasn't expecting that. Like I would work all day and then I couldn't do anything in the evening because I was just so exhausted. So I think it is a piece of art, but it is kind of weird. Right now, I feel a little bit disconnected from it, if I'm being honest. And I'm like, oh, that's like, I did that. Because normally with my ceramic work, I'll put it on a wall and I'm like, that is me. Like, that's me on a wall. And it's kind of crazy how I got there. But like, that is an extension of myself. And just because this is such a different product, and I'm wondering as I'm thinking about it, if it has to do with like the materiality of clay and developing those individual components, because it's like it's all a modular system, and within my own work, it's it's a similar approach, but like I'm creating the modules and like the within designing this piece, I kind of thought of it as at first I thought I was going to think of it as like a pixelated image, and it ended up becoming much more like broad strokes of color in the final design. Um, I don't know what was the question.
I'm thinking about how you judge this as art. And you said that actually you need some distance generally before you can think about it for its aesthetic qualities. But I think the way you work is interesting because there almost has to be an obsession with process to get to the end result. And I'm even thinking your ceramic work, like just the ceramic tile work that you have, that sometimes you have hundreds of tile, even that. There's obsession involved. And obsession
Yeah.
is so personal and romantic in a way. Like I think sometimes we fall in love with our process and we have a relationship with our process, and that's not actually art. Like that's emotional fulfillment. Then when the object is done, or in your case the installation, then you get to judge it as art, or maybe the art critic judges it as art or not.
Well, and I think I'm still in that obsession phase and having that emotional connection with it where I'm not able to step quite away from it. And I think it's like seen as largest piece of public art in Indianapolis and is a quarter of a mile long. I think within it, because, and we haven't talked about this yet, like the inspiration within it, I think I got off topic a little bit earlier, but like the inspiration that's behind the fence and where I started with those broad stripes of rainbow, and then how the directions that those patterns went in, and then the way that I was able to tie it into the history of Indianapolis is conceptually really intriguing to me. How it's kind of like these small little, um, I don't know, like little tokens or I don't know the correct word of Easter eggs of like people identifying and drawing their own connections. And I think within public art, like seeing it as like, is this art? Like I think it absolutely is art. And the thing that I find so valuable about it is that anybody can access it, anybody can experience it. And I think the access point for it is so welcoming in a way that like a white cube isn't. And that's something that's really valuable for me. Like the fine art research I'm making is really intriguing to me, but I also want people of all different backgrounds to be able to approach and connect to the work. And I think that's something within both scopes of my bodies of work, both the public art and the studio practice. Like the work that I'm making is very vibrant. It's very colorful. It's a lot of formal shapes and it can be pretty simplified. So like there is an opening for people of all different backgrounds, all different education levels in art can appreciate. Um, but one thing that was really magical about, well, one thing that was so great about the airport is everybody there who works for the airport authority is so kind. And where we were stationed, we were parking, we had a storage unit full of all of these boxes of cups, and it was in the limo lot. And so we were working and walking and hanging out like with the limo drivers and the taxi driver. There weren't really limos, but like Uber drivers and taxi drivers. And every time we would walk to the bathroom, because we were using their bathroom facilities, they would say something new, or they would see something in the fence that I hadn't seen. And there's a lot of people from multicultural backgrounds. And so somebody was like, oh, within those stripes, like those specific stripes right there, it looks like the flag of this country. And like, I think he was from South Africa. And he was like, I connect to that so strongly. And that's so amazing that you've made this fence with all of these different pattern components that other people are able to like connect to because of like what their like home country's flag is or like their background. And so that was really amazing to like have this connecting force. And they were also so supportive. Like every time we'd go to the bathroom, they'd be like, you guys are doing great. Which was very much needed encouragement.
Well, what I love is that you talked about how it's a quarter of a mile long, so you can you can see this from an airplane. Like you are making art on a scale in which you can see it from the air, you can see it from the ground. When you're driving past, you can see it, and you're affecting such a larger scale of people than, say, art in a white cube, as you talked about in the gallery. Like if you get 10,000 people into a gallery show, like every, I don't know, month, that's great. But that airport has 10,000 people. I don't know. I don't know what the turnover is, but every couple days, maybe.
Yeah, they have 12,000 travelers every day. Sometimes if they have like, I think they host Gen Con, they had 70,000 travelers within a weekend. We have the Indianapolis 500, which is like the largest sporting event in the world. So it's so fascinating, like how many people can reach the airport itself. Like we have a huge FedEx hub here. There's 10,000 employees who work for like the entire grounds of the airport. Um, and so, yeah, the reach is just insane, but it's also interesting. Like some people notice it right away because where it's positioned is it's right as you're heading up to the arrivals and departures. And so if somebody's super stressed or like late or they're speeding, like I've talked to people who haven't even recognized it. And then I've also spoken to other people who've been like watching the install happen the entire time and are just like, what's going on? So it is interesting. My sister has a friend who travels weekly to Washington, D.C., and we were installing it all summer and he never saw it. So it is amazing. Like, depending, I think, people have different levels of observation and interest. And also, it's almost like it seems like it's white noise for probably people who are regular travelers. Like, are they even recognizing it? But yeah, it's pretty cool.
We're going to move on, but I have one more question about this project. You work with your sister; she's your assistant, and then you also have other people you work with. How has it been mixing family with work in that way?
It's been a really interesting and fantastic experience for me because being a good manager is really important to me, and treating employees equitably is very important to me. And so there's just been different learning curves that because I'm working with my sister as an assistant has allowed me the flexibility to be able to like try out different methods of communication. I'm not the most stern person. And so telling people what to do, even though that is literally my job, is uncomfortable for me. So it just gave me a much more comfortable space because the way I see my work going is that like in the next couple of years, I will be having a team under me. And even when I was in grad school, I had hired undergraduate students to help me make my thesis show. And so it provided a really safe space for me to start learning how to navigate, how to be an effective leader. And then also like towards the end of any install, I get very stressed out. I get very tense. And so the last couple of weeks of installing this, I just like told the people I was working with, I was like, hey, it's nothing personal. I'm going to be very quiet. I'm going to be very short in my communication. And I'm just like need to listen to my headphones and focus and get this done. And everybody on the team was just super understanding. The other person I hired was a muralist. And then I had a fourth person come on at the end who's a ceramic artist. So like they're all in the arts and creative. My sister is very creative and has a fashion design degree. And so it just provided a really great space. And then I know you said that we were going to move on, but one thing I wanted to talk about, if that's okay, was like the inspiration behind the fence.
Yeah.
Once I created the rainbow stripe, I was kind of like, how I made this whole fence and half of it's rainbow essentially. And I was like, what is going on? And once I figured out the huge rainbow stripe, I remember there was a rainbow carpet put in place in the Indianapolis airport when I was a child. And so going to the terminal back then, we didn't have intense security in the 90s. I was able to like go down to the gate to see my dad off or pick up like when he flew in. And so I drew the connection of like rainbow carpet and the old terminal with the initial design I had created, the initial pattern. And so then I started going down the history of the old terminal. So the Indianapolis airport built a brand new terminal in 2008. And so, but before then they had this beautiful, like mid-century modern, like angular roof line that was like very triangular. And so I was able to pull those parts into the design, and that kind of helped catapult the design process. And then I also tied in a lot of black and white due to the black and white checkerboard of the Indianapolis 500, of like the finish line flag. And so it was really interesting to be able to like tie in these facets of history of Indianapolis. And then what was the most fascinating part is I had told somebody that, like, obviously I told the airport the inspiration behind the design and pattern as they were going through the approval process. And we couldn't find a photo, and I couldn't find a photo of the carpet to save my life. And I had this very vivid memory of it. And eventually somebody found a photo of it and sent it to me. And it was interesting because it didn't quite look like how I remembered it. But it was a rainbow carpet, but it was slightly different than like how I had remembered it. And then also it was put in for the Pan Am Games of 1987, which Indy hosted. And so then I started researching that. And the logo of the Pan Am Games in 1987 is like eerily similar to some of the aspects of the pattern design, but like I had never seen that logo before. So it's just interesting how all these threads are like woven together within a piece. Was really fascinating and fun.
The rainbow is an interesting symbol. I mean, in one hand, like I think among our generation, there's kind of there was some, I can't remember the name, but it's a cartoon that had the rainbows that came out of the,
was it Care Bears?
Care Bears. Yes. I could not think of
Yeah.
it. Like that was like a rainbow symbol. It's also a symbol for gay pride. Like that's something in terms of flags. If you see a rainbow flag, like that draws that to memory. In the religious context, it can mean hope, like in the Christian context. So it's funny how one sort of linear presentation of colors, everyone relates to it. Like it's something that almost across culturally, people are like, yeah, that means something to me. But how do you as an artist, like how do you pick a personal meaning with the symbol of a rainbow? Because you said it shows up in your ceramic work as well.
I think a lot of my research goes back to, well, the four facets of my research right now, it's always changing, is kind of exploring pattern, visual perception, pleasure, and play. And so within that, a lot of the things I'm looking at is kind of how we process and experience joy. And so I think there's a lot of joy that can be brought about through color research. And so that's probably the most direct tie that I have to it in my work. I do identify as queer, but I don't necessarily talk about that within my fine art research.
I kind of like the idea though that if this, I don't know, I haven't seen the whole fence. I love the idea that in Indianapolis, in Indiana, you might have a section that is a that is a gay pride flag within, almost like it is a hidden subversion middle finger, but artistically.
Wow, you hit that nail on the head. That is definitely was running through my brain, but nobody's actually brought that up. I mean, that's a huge part of it. And it's even interesting as we were installing it. Like I'm a creative individual. I'm more left leaning in politics, and I'm queer, and I also have queer family members. So I'm like a huge supporter of the LGBTQ community. And I thought I was going to receive pushback for it, and I didn't at all. And it was really exciting for me to be able to do this. And it is like the fence itself is just like so welcoming and exciting. And what I wanted to do with it was to create this experience of joy and wonder that I had as a child when I was walking through the airport on the rainbow carpet. And like, yeah, it's representative of gay pride, but also it just creates this experience of joy and happiness with it when you see it. And it's kind of impossible to like look at it and feel like you're in a bad mood. But interestingly enough, as I was installing it, there were different sections. We ran out of cups all the time. Some things would be filled in, some wouldn't. And so there was a section of like vertical rainbow stripes, and we only had like blue and purple. And it was like a black stripe blue, black stripe royal blue, black stripe purple. And somebody came up to me and was discussing how much they liked that. And I was like, thanks so much. Cause like in my head, I'm thinking it's a giant pride flag. And I was like, thank you. I love rainbows. And I looked over and they had a Blue Lives Matter t-shirt on, and like, I would have never drawn that connection. And at first I was very like distraught of like, oh my gosh, it was a Friday. We were heading into the weekend. And I was like, we have got to fill in other colors because like, this is not a political statement from the airport or myself. And like, I don't want anybody thinking that this is or misconstruing it. And I actually had two people who like made that connection with it. And so it was so interesting because I was like, oh, it's actually based off of the rainbow carpet from the airport terminal. because it's not directly a political statement, but like also it kind of is.
Well, I think it also shows that people will derive meaning from color and pattern, which is kind of the bigger point, I think, of you. I don't want to say what the point of your work is, but it seems like people that work with tile and repetition, that's a part of the thing, is like there is meaning here.
Well, and it is so interesting. I think with that, it was a reminder. And a huge portion of my work is I don't want to influence the viewer's experience of it. So within I don't know, like artist statements, I have what the work means to me, but I want people to be able to come up to the work with their own background, their own experiences, and draw their own connection points. So like if they see a shape and they're like, oh, that looks like that, like they're creating this whole emotional experience with the work that is based off of their life. And so it was a nice reminder, even though I was a little bit distraught, of like everybody's going to come to this rainbow fence and like draw their own connections to it, and they'll have different sections of the fence that will like they'll have an emotional tie to. And so it was a nice reminder of like this is being effective in what I'm hoping it's going to do, with everybody else being able to draw their own points of interest within it.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Hi, I'm Kara, content creator and Facebook wrangler for Amico Brent, bringing you ideas and support for your creative adventures every day. This week's episode is brought to you by Amico Brent. Find your favorite Amico glaze at your local distributor. Happy glazing!
I want to talk about your MFA show. There was a piece that was called My Moon, and I know there's a bunch of pieces in there, but this piece had a piece of furniture that the tile wrapped around, or the three-dimensional object wrapped, three-dimensional surface wraps around this object that you can sit on, but then right behind it, the same color is on the wall going vertically. So it kind of push-pulls 3D. Like I didn't notice at first that it was 3D. And then there's a picture of you. I was scrolling through your Instagram and you're sitting on it. And then it was like, all right, this is 3D, like you pop out from the wall. But can you talk about working with tile on the wall and then working with tile on a piece of furniture on something like that? Like what is interesting to you about that play of space?
A lot of the work that I'm doing, it's op art-esque. Like I'm really interested in op art, and the confusion that occurs when you're not quite understanding what you're seeing, or if there's you can have multiple reads of an experience. So with some of the tile installations, you might look at it might look quite flat, and then as you move around it, you're able to see that it's quite dimensional and it's causing you to question what you're seeing. And I think some of that harkens back to some of the research I was working on before going to grad school. Is like I'm somebody who deals with anxiety, and so having the experience of like questioning what's going on, like what is the reality, and kind of those experiences of being in your brain and really trying to filter through what's going on. Another thing within that is that I like to create like experiences that can kind of allow the viewer to float into reverie. And so these moments when you're questioning what you're looking at, you're really transfixed by it. And it can kind of allow you to float into this fantasy scape and allow yourself a moment to dream and kind of forget what's going on around you in the outside world. So it's a lot about like creating experiences and these environments that really envelop you.
I can see that when you have like a installation that goes wider than the periphery of your eyes, because we generally see, there's probably some science to this, but we probably see, I don't know, 6 to 10 feet without turning our head or something, depending on how far you are back from that. And I like that the tiles are three-dimensional enough that you want to get close to them and see them, or at least in my mind you do. But what that does is that you're literally drawing them in. Like now you're in a colorscape. You're creating a colorscape that person is sort of within. And I think you talked about it as being a dreamscape, or almost like it's its own world.
Well, and it's interesting because something I really like to do is like reflect on how did I function. I started exploring art when I was 17 and got serious about it when I was 21 in college. And so what about experiences I had before that that are coming into play now? And so I've always liked organized chaos. I want a lot of things around me. And so, like, when I was in high school, every single surface of wall in my bedroom was covered in magazine cutouts. My mom was so upset. Um, but just like filling spaces in an organized way. Like, it wasn't like all of these mixed matched pieces of things. Like, they were perfectly cut out. There was like a perfect half-inch frame around all of them. Like, it's very organized, but it was everywhere. And so that's what I'm just trying to do in my work, is create these experiences and environments where I'm able to be surrounded by tile as much as possible. And there's just like something that I'm still trying to sort through is like, why do I find tile so seductive? Like, I have such an intense love for it. And like, I'm planning my vacations around like, okay, where can I go do tile research? Because I want to go see like that tile and that tile. And I'm still trying to sort out. I think it's just like more of the qualities and what you can do with tile is really where the interest lies.
Well, first, what was on the walls of your high school room? I got to know that.
Oh yeah. Great question. I was very into like emo pop punk music. So it was a lot of musicians and cutouts from this magazine called AP, which was alternative press, but like for alternative music. So I think it was a lot of that. It wasn't very much art things.
Okay.
I was always like into art as a student in high school and stuff, but I wasn't like, I think I thought I was going to be like an event manager for like a tour, like a music tour when I was growing up.
Well, I'd love to hear that, because my walls were totally plastered with Grateful Dead, Fish, like basically
Amazing.
jam band stuff, but literally the exact same way that you described, except mine overlapped. So it was one visual experience of almost like you're at a concert, but it was little snippets. And of course, I was really into the music. So it's also, I could put on music and be in my room and feel like I was having this three-dimensional experience.
Yes, that's amazing. Yeah.
The next thing I was thinking about is that as you describe tile as being seductive, I do think about all these religious experiences that are based on being in enclosed tile walls. So let's think about the great mosques in Istanbul. It's that same experience. Like, you walk in and you're like, whoa, like this visually describes God or some larger presence by art. Like, art is the thing that conveyed that internal connection to something greater. So I feel like when you say it's seductive, do you mean like, in what way is tile seductive? Is it almost like a spiritual experience to make this, or am I drawing too much in this?
No, I don't think you're drawing too much into it. I think that was a really interesting connection that you made, because like there is a lot of religious history around it. And before going to school, I was looking at a lot of Islamic tile work, and I don't have any connection to those references. And so I kind of have shifted away from that. But it is similar that I'm like hoping to create a sense of wonder and these experiences of like, just like serenity, where like they're doing similar, but it is also connecting to like a religious higher being. Whereas like I'm more so trying to draw that from within the viewer of like having this moment with themselves. But what was the second part of that question?
Just thinking about seductiveness with tile,
Right.
Because like we think of seductive as like a romantic thing, but it also is seductive as an attraction, like you just want to be in it, with it, around it, whatever. So tell me about that. Like, is it the process of making the tile that's seductive for you, or is it the finished installation? Like, what part of that really attracts you?
I think within when I'm thinking about like the seductive quality of tile, I'm more so thinking of like a high gloss, super ceramic-y finish. It's like I'm a huge romantic about the material. And I think a lot of people who do clay are tied to it because of the materiality of it. But I like, there's this installation on Alfred's campus that Wayne Higby did. And it's just like this, it's called Earth Cloud. And it's just this beautiful wall of tile. And it is so incredible. I just want to be around it. I want to touch it. I want to lick it. Like, I have not licked it, but like, that's the urge that I get. I don't know. This is like an interesting question for me to flesh out, because my work, the direction that it's heading in is one of the things I'm talking about is pleasure. So within that, I'm researching right now a lot of human sexuality and reading books about human sexuality and relationships. And so I think that's something I'll have to explore more, but I think there's definitely a connection in there.
Yeah, and there's something too about tile or glaze that you were kind of joking. You said you want to lick it, but I've had that with pots so much. It's like you want to consume it because it's
Hmm.
so beautiful. And celadon glazes are one of those things. Like I've seen pots in museums where I'm just like like just can't believe that color is that color. So, can you talk about developing your ceramic surfaces and developing specific colors with the glazes you're working on?
Yeah, so I am a huge tester. So like I love testing and I'm very interested in glaze research, but not in the way that like I'm going in and manipulating a glaze and adding like 3 more grams of silica to see what happens. It's like I just want to collect all of the recipes and try them all out. And then even when I do that, I'm still using the same 3 or 4 glazes. So it's more so I think about the color combinations. Right now, I have like a satin matte glaze, a high gloss glaze, and a matte glaze that I use. And then within my within my thesis show, I also had an on go I was using that was like almost looked like a sweaty surface. And the way that you applied it, depending on the depth that you were spraying, because I was spraying in a spray booth, I could either get really close and it would provide this like beautiful sweaty surface that blistered in some areas, or if I sprayed it from far away, it literally looked like a velvet texture. And so that interest lies in like kind of causing the viewer to question what material they're looking at. Like, even though I love a high gloss tile within my work, I like the experience of like, is it dense foam? Is that like looking from it from afar? Is that dense foam? Is that going to be a hard surface? Is it going to be soft? It's just causing more confusion in the viewer. But I think maybe confusion isn't the right word, more like curiosity. Um, and then within the satin matte glaze I'm using, depending on how it cools, it could either be like a really sugary surface or it could be beautiful satin matte with some moments of gloss shining through. And so with the work that I'm creating right now, since it is a lot of client work, it's really, I get super excited about color matching and like creating the exact perfect color. Like if you give me a paint sample, like I'll use the Mason stains. And so I got away from, I don't use a lot of natural oxides, but I am learning a lot of like the different availabilities of Mason stains. And like how I work within my color research is I have like an accordion file of paint chips because every time I go to the paint store, I just pick up like 50 new ones. And so I'll pick my colors based off of paint chips. And then from there, I'll color match the glazes from there.
When you have the very first idea for a ceramic installation, is that you see in your mind, can you like imagine what the finished thing is going to look like in color wise and shape and all of that? Or is it that you start off in Rhino and you're improvising at multiple stages from the digital to the physical? What's the first concept of the art?
Everything shifts so much from the get-go. And the original idea is typically I'll start with like one silhouette or one form, and then it's like manipulated in ways that it's reversed, it's mirrored, it's sit in an array, in a spiral. So there's a lot of shifting that goes on. And then once I develop a pattern, I'll typically create the pattern and then the color choices will happen. And I am a procrastinator and I do have ADHD and anxiety. So like those color choices are the last minute decision. But like within that, it's a superpower to be a procrastinator, is what I tell myself. And so I get to a point where like I don't have any more free time to like lollygag about. And it's like, okay, this needs to get in a kiln in 2 days. What colors are we doing? And so then because it's a high pressure situation, things just kind of fall out of me and they typically are very successful. But color is, I'm trying to be better about that, but it is like the final step. So I just have stacks and stacks of bisqueware. And then I'm just like, okay, got it. Time to finish this because it has to be shipped out in a week. So it is interesting because I love color so much, and so much of my work is about color theory, but it's typically the final stage of thinking, and it's because I'm in a pressure cooker.
Do you mind if I ask you questions about anxiety?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So there's this sort of great dichotomy, which is that you can have anxiety and you even said ADHD, like you're feeling scattered all over the place. But then also you've told me through this process, you experience flow in the work state, which is a great antidote for anxiety. And I'm wondering if this very heavy process-driven way of creating art is an antidote. Like, is this the thing that has solved your mental workings up there?
Absolutely. I think for like when I was in Florida, I was kind of coming to terms and understanding that I had anxiety. And it was like the most severe it has been in my life was when I was in Florida for 2 years out of residency. And so when I was there, I kind of thought of the work as like, I'm doing the work as meditation, as a way to process the world around me and understand what is going on and how to cope. I was using it as a coping mechanism. And then I still need that coping mechanism in a way because I'm doing a lot of design work, emails, client work, and meetings. And so I'm not in the studio as much. And it's examining like the direction I want my career to go in. If I am this, boss who's then having people make the work for me, I don't have my hands in it. And I've realized like just like being at the fence, it's like a detriment to my well-being if I'm not in the studio working, making like slip casting and cleaning up tiles is like the most mundane thing. But I love putting a podcast on or music and having like an hour to myself. And even when I was in grad school and I was having assistants work with me, like I had the best team around me, but like sometimes somebody would come into my studio and they'd be like, hey, I have an hour. Can I help you? And I would be like, I actually need an hour alone in my studio to not talk to anybody. And like, if you're available in an hour, please come back and like, we can figure out something for you to help me with. But there's a sentence in my thesis, which I have not looked at since I submitted it in May. So I don't know exactly what it says, but I had these great discussions with Linda Sikora, and it was through that. And I've been in extensive therapy. Like I go to therapy weekly for the last 3 years. I thought that the work was, how do I say this? Like, I thought that the anxiety and the mental health issues, because I have like a host of like, everything comorbidity. So there's like not just one or two things, but within that, I thought that that's what was propelling my work. And then I realized by going to therapy, it was actually distracting me from like really like achieving and going where I wanted to be. And so like, yes, I needed the studio for my well-being and to like cope and process things. But really by going to therapy and being able to work through all of these things and getting on like appropriate medication, I was holding myself back by not getting the help that I needed. And so now that I'm able to get the help that I needed, I'm really able to like, hit my goals in a way where like I was hitting those goals before, but there was a ton of self-loathing and like me getting in my own way. And now I'm able to do it and like enjoy it, which is pretty cool. It's not like pure panic the entire time.
Well, I think a little bit of anxiety is great fuel, but a lot of anxiety is paralyzing. So there has to be some like either therapy intervention, medical intervention, like something that kind of makes the anxiety, or at least for me, that makes it acceptable, because I remember times in my undergraduate days where I would literally feel panicked, like as in a fight or flight syndrome panic in the studio. And it's like, this is not sustainable. Like I'm a potter, like what's going on?
Yeah.
So I had to then do a similar thing as you. I had to work on my mental health independently so that the studio could be an asset and not, I think you just said it, as a distraction, not a distraction.
Yes, exactly. And I think I am on medication for my anxiety now. And like if I go a day and I forget to take one of my pills, I am just like, how did I function like this every day? Like I'm a lot less harsh on myself. So I'm like, whoopsie doodle, like I'll take a pill tomorrow. But it's also like, it makes me really sad to just realize that I was feeling like this all the time, and like just thinking that this is what life was like. And now I'm able to have like the support of others and the support of medication to like be able to enjoy life at a much better level. But yeah, it is so interesting like how much things are able to shift when you're able to like get the help that like you deserve and be able to work through those things. But I was Megan Smythe was my advisor one semester in grad school, and I was crying to her in my studio because it's grad school, and I was just talking about like I was like, why am I like doing deep therapy while I'm also in grad school? Like this was a horrible decision. Why am I doing both of these things at the same time? And then she just said, she was like, yeah, but what a better opportunity. Like, aren't you so lucky that you get to work through both of these and like really find out who you are as a maker and an artist, and also like who you are all at the same time. And like looking back, I wouldn't have it any other way. But it was hard. It was very hard.
Well, it all comes up I can only speak for myself, but it seems to all come up when I'm ready to deal with it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So however you get to the point, whether it's therapy, studio, whatever it is, it's so nice to be able to have that time and space to do the work and then come out on the other side of it. And for me, that anxiety has gotten so much better over the years. So I'm talking to you from your future, I think, that maybe that anxiety hopefully will get better. I just want to give you some hope that it's gotten so much better for me that I hope it will happen for you too.
Okay, no, that's so helpful to hear, and I appreciate that so much, because like it's gotten like poor little I call baby Jackie is like who I was before I started going to therapy. And like baby Jackie was having a hell of a time, and I like things have gotten so much better. So that's so helpful to hear that they're just continuing for you to also get better. But it's hard, like being in your like graduating from undergrad, and you have this huge goal of trying to figure out how to make a living as an artist. And my 20s were hard and rough because I'm like scraping together money and like going to residencies and trying to make it work. And there's no straightforward path. I think I would like always study people's resumes on their websites, and I'd be like, how did they do it? And it's like there's no straightforward answer. Everybody kind of has to figure it out for their own. But like anytime I just gave an artist talk last week to undergraduate students, and it was so valuable to be able to talk to them so transparently, like about my experiences, and like this is hard, but it is worth it, but you have to put in the work. And yeah, it's definitely an interesting route that we have chosen.
And we've chosen a profession that is not, as you mentioned, it's not linear. Like I like this idea of looking at people's resumes, because sometimes it does look like, oh, they went to undergrad, then they went to grad, and they went to this residency. But in the moment, what it feels like is that all the options are available in every direction. And you're asking this grad school, do you like me? Do you want me to come to your grad school? Then you're asking the residency, do you want me to come to your residency? It's all this uncertainty. But then when you look backwards, it appears that people are so certain.
Absolutely. I think I saw Jen Allen's resume, and she had like gone to the Bray. I think she did a summer at the Bray before she went to grad school. And I was like, oh, how did you do that? That's amazing. Like she is amazing. But I was like, what? And then like I applied on a whim for a summer program there, and then I got in. And it's like, if you look at my resume now, you would be like, wow, she looks like she knew what she was doing. But I assure you, I had no clue what I was doing. And was constantly questioning. I like try to get away from ceramics like 4 different times in my 20s. Like I tried to take like 4 very direct steps away, and every single time something happened and I got pulled back in. And by the 4th time I was like, well, this keeps happening. So like, maybe I should just listen to the universe.
Well, I wanted to end thinking about Indianapolis, because this is like your home base.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, in the clay world, like Amico's there, there's a lot of ceramic artists there, but what is it that keeps you there, that makes you wanted to start your business there? Like, tell me about Indianapolis as a place to like make a life.
Well, Indianapolis is a really wonderful city. I think sometimes people think of it as like a flyover state. I've heard that before. It's a really great city. It's unbelievably affordable. It's very easy to get around. And as I mentioned before, like Hoosier hospitality, it's Midwest. People are very kind. And I've been really embraced by the artistic community here. just like with the Arts Council of Indianapolis, I got my first kilns through a grant that I got from them. And so I think when I moved back after Florida, because I had a hard time in Florida, I moved back because, I mean, honestly, the reason I'm here is because of financial stability, if I'm being blunt. But also most of my family is here. But when I moved back, my stepmom actually contacted somebody and she was like, who are the 3 people that Jackie should like meet up with? And so she gave me a name of 3 different individuals to network with. I asked them all to coffee. And then like from there, they have each like been so supportive. And like at one of my major milestones, like one of them was involved. I don't know if I'm going to stay here, but it is like an unbelievable place, and like it's a very safe space for me. So like if I leave, I think I will return eventually. And I've been lucky enough where like when I moved back from Florida, I lived with my mom for 2 years in my late 20s, and all of these decisions have been made around like, what am I going to do that's going to best help my career? And so that's always led me back to Indy because it's affordable to live here, and I know I can produce the work that I want to produce here.
That is a real concern. Like financial viability is something that I think more undergraduate students like can almost feel like we should sit down and be like, okay, look, if you take on all these loans, it is going to crush your life. So where are you going to live after this? What do you want to do? How are you actually going to make money? In fact, my grandmother's Jeanette Carter set me down and had that same talk in 1998. And it was really helpful. And I like that you're talking about people think of Indiana as like a flyover state, but there's so many former industrial hubs. Like I think about Detroit. All these different places are amazing because it's cheap. It is so cheap.
Yeah. And that's what I've been talking to people about. Like in a dream world, I'd live in New York City, but I have to afford my own rent. And then I also have to afford studio rent. And like the scale of right now I'm in my mom's garage. So like I'm in such a privileged position where I'm speaking to you from my bedroom. I don't live with my mom, but like it's the room I stay in, and that's where my office is. And then my studio is in her garage right now. And so when I'm going to France for a 2-month fellowship in January, February, and when I return, I'm kind of at that point in my career where I need to start spending money and paying rent for studio space. And so I have this big question of like, will that be an indie? What's the square footage cost of a studio? And like, if it's not an indie, where else is it going to be? Because affording studio rent and actual rent in New York City is near impossible. And both my parents are accountants. And so I'm very business minded, both because of how I was raised and also I think just like in my blood. So it's always been like when I was in Florida, I was like scraping by, and a lot of my decisions have been like, what's going to put me in a good financial situation to be able to keep doing this? Because I'm so lucky that this is my career now and I'm doing this full time. So like, how can I keep growing this business essentially?
Can you leave your website or social media so people could get in touch if they wanted to talk about anything you mentioned today?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. My website is jackiehead.com and my Instagram is jphead. And I am happy to talk to anybody about anything. I'm very transparent. And so if anybody has any questions, like, please feel free to reach out.
Well, thanks. It was good to see you today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ben. This was so fun. And it was so nice to see you and catch up.
I'd like to thank Jackie for coming on the show. When I first met her, she was making pots, and they were beautiful vessels covered with patterns. But now that I see her installation work, she has just multiplied her love and obsession with pattern times like 1,000. So it's been really interesting to see the direction that she's taken that. Also wanted to take a minute and thank today's sponsor, Amico Brent. They're sponsoring this episode of the show as well as others on the Brickyard Network. And if you and your organization would like to sponsor a show, we would definitely appreciate your support. You can get in touch through our website, which is brickyardnetwork.org. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.
This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.